Hello and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to episode 5 of NCERT International Relations. Today we will talk about India and its neighborhood in complete detail. But before we start, let me wish everyone a very happy Independence Day. May this day serve as an inspiration for all the UPSC aspirants to put in your best efforts to ensure that you get an opportunity as an IAS, IPS, IFS officer to serve this incredible nation. So, on this happy occasion, Unacademy is celebrating the 80th Independence Day with a special offer for our students. If you're looking to enroll for our classes, if you're looking to prepare for 2027 attempt or beyond, this is the perfect opportunity for you. The subscription is now available at just 16,999, our lowest price ever. Along with that, you get added offers. You stand a chance to win a 100% refund. 80 lucky winners will get a 100% refund as we mark the 80th Independence Day. Along with that, you get free extension. Let's say you avail a 15-month subscription, you get 3 months free extension on that. Let's say you avail a 24-month subscription, you get a 12-month free extension. And along with that, if you buy a 2-year subscription and above, then you stand a chance to get CSE Assure guarantee along with Indian Express subscription. Under CSE Assure, let's say for some reason you don't clear the exam in the first attempt despite your best efforts, then your next attempt is entirely on us. It ensures that you continue your preparation for the next attempt without any additional cost, without a break in your subscription. And if you avail a subscription of more than 2 years, you also get subscription to Indian Express. Indian Express e-paper, the UPSC essential segment, along with the premium articles, the explained research articles, all of them would be available. This subscription alone would cost you 1500 rupees. So this would be a part of your Unacademy subscription if you avail a 2-year subscription and above. So those of you who are interested, please enroll by tonight. I'm told the offer ends tonight and the link for enrolling is provided in the description box below. But if you're looking to join our English classes, if you're looking to be guided by our English educators, then you have to enter the code IAS English. As you're aware, we have a new stalwart who has joined our team, Jatin Gupta sir. And honestly, this team is considered to be one of the best as far as English classes are concerned. So if you're looking to be guided by the English team, do ensure that you enter the code IAS English when you're subscribing. With this, let's get started and look at the topics that we're going to discuss today. So yesterday we covered the South Asia region. We understood the historical, social and economic challenges that are present and how it creates geopolitical complexities even today. We even discussed why South Asia is one of the most volatile regions in the world. So, in this class, we will dive a little deeper into our neighborhood. We will pick out our neighboring countries one by one. Nepal and Bhutan. First, we'll focus on the Himalayan belt. We'll look at the Himalayan neighbors of India. Then we'll move towards Afghanistan. Then the eastern neighbors of India, Myanmar and Bangladesh. And finally, we'll look at the Indian Ocean region covering Sri Lanka and Maldives. If you can see, China, Pakistan is not mentioned here because we have two separate classes to cover China and Pakistan. Next week on Monday and Tuesday, that's what we'll be covering. India, China, mainly the border issues, the 1962 conflict. Then on Tuesday, we'll talk about India, Pakistan and the history of wars and conflicts between the two countries. So in today's session, I'm keeping out Pakistan and China, but we'll cover every other neighboring country. And we will take a deeper look at the pressing issues present across our neighborhood. So as I said, this is class number 5. We have many more interesting sessions lined up till the 31st of August. So this is planned to be a comprehensive course for international relations to lay the foundation for your general studies and as well as for your PSIR optional. So along with these live YouTube classes, I'm conducting a free quiz and practice test as well on the Unacademy app. After you attend these classes, I urge you to take up the free quiz, which will be conducted every Thursday and Friday at 3 p.m. For example, today and yesterday at 3 p.m., I took a free quiz where a lot of students took up the practice questions along with a good revision of these topics. So all these sessions are lined up every Thursday and Friday till the 31st of August. So if you choose to enroll for these free sessions on the Unacademy app, you just have to scan the QR code and you'll be able to find the links of all these sessions. Now, at the end of this course, after you complete the YouTube sessions and as well as the quiz sessions on the Unacademy app, finally, on 31st August, we will conduct a NCERT mega quiz for international relations from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. again on the Unacademy app. So this will be a great opportunity for you to practice prelims level questions, revise these topics once again, ensure you master these topics, and the ones who perform well, they stand a chance to win up to 20% flat additional discount on Unacademy Platinum subscription. Unacademy Platinum is our most premium offering, which brings the best of the online offline world, where students have to mandatorily keep their cameras on so that the educators can have a look at what the students are doing and hold them accountable in the class. It provides for a seamless two-way interaction. So if you're looking to enroll for the Platinum program, you will get a 20% discount if you perform well in the NCERT mega quiz on the 31st of August. So the links for all these sessions are provided in the description box as well. And if you want to download the detailed PPTs that I'm providing in these sessions, please scan the QR code over here. I'll be sharing the PDFs in another day. Now, let's come back to our discussion and let's start with the Himalayan neighbors of India. First, let's focus on Nepal. When you look at India and Nepal, if you look at the location where Nepal is located, it's very clear that it occupies a strategic location because it's a landlocked country that is sandwiched between two Asian giants, India and China. So, ever since the PRC was established, the People's Republic of China, in 1949, it has been displaying its expansionist intentions, its territorial ambitions, and it began with the annexation of Tibet in 1950. So, since then, the other Himalayan kingdoms like Nepal, Sikkim, Bhutan, they've always been worried about China's expansionist designs. If the large kingdom of Tibet could fall and could be occupied by China, the kingdoms that existed here, from Nepal to Sikkim to Bhutan, they all had similar concerns. Because please remember, Sikkim, until 1975, was a protectorate state of India. It was not an integral part of the Indian Union. So India cultivated these Himalayan kingdoms as a security buffer against any possible Chinese aggression. This was a strategy that we borrowed from the British back in 1800s. The British feared a threat from the Russians from the north as part of their great game that was going on across Europe, Eurasia, and the rest of the world. Because of their intense rivalry and competition, the British feared that Russians could possibly attempt to invade their most prized asset, which was their colony in India. So all the Himalayan kingdoms were cultivated as buffer states, as security buffers. And that's one reason why the British never fully integrated these kingdoms into the British Indian Union. They gave them their limited autonomy from Tibet to Nepal to Ladakh to Sikkim to Bhutan. Right? This entire stretch was largely granted autonomy. And these princely states and the kingdoms that existed, they acted as a buffer for British India. So post independence, India borrowed the strategy and we have cultivated these states that exist here as security buffer against any potential Chinese aggression. So naturally, these small countries have sought India's support for their growth, for their development, for their defense and security as well. In fact, for many years, India played a pivotal role in defending Nepal, in supplying arms and weapons to Nepali armed forces, in securing Nepal's borders with China, in providing military training. With regard to Bhutan, even today, India has a binding legal commitment as part of our friendship treaty, where India is committed to defend Bhutan against external threats. And we will cover that in the next part of our discussion. So, India has maintained a very cordial relationship. India has been the primary supplier of all essential goods and items because, as a landlocked country, it has very limited access to the outside world. So, accessing global markets and trade routes through China is not feasible, it's not viable given the terrain and the long distance to Chinese ports. The route towards China is simply not viable for Nepal for economic reasons. So India remains the only option. And when you look at the border states from Uttarakhand to UP and Bihar, Sikkim and West Bengal. All the border states, they lie in close proximity. They have very close linkages on the other side of the border. Especially if you look at the Terai belt, the plains of Nepal, the Terai region extends into the border areas of UP and Bihar. And this is where you find a ethnic community called the Mades people or the Madesis, who share close cultural ties with India. Madesis often marry into Indian families in UP and Bihar, and they share marital ties and family based relations that exist along this border. So, naturally, the developments in Nepal become a matter of great interest for India with regard to India's overall stability, with regard to our strategic interests, with regard to our economic and cultural ties. Nepal is very, very crucial. Look at the ancient civilizational ties that we share with Nepal, the linkages through religious connections offered through Hinduism and Buddhism. And both were essentially part of the very same Indian civilization. So, keeping this in mind, keeping the historical civilizational ties and the close people to people ties in mind, India Nepal post independence have cultivated a very close partnership. And it is built upon the open border system that is provided under the 1950 Treaty of Peace and Friendship. Both countries have decided to keep their borders open with no hard border controls. That's why this border is not fenced. There are no strict immigration checks that are applied. And as part of the open border system, both countries provide visa free travel to their citizens. In fact, you don't even need to carry an Indian passport to enter Nepal, right? Any Indian identification document would be enough. And reciprocal treatment is provided by Nepal. National treatment is extended by both the sides. Nepali students come to India to study. Nepali workers depend on India for their jobs, for their livelihood. Nepali traders depend on Indian trade routes and ports to trade with the rest of the world. So in every aspect, Nepal has a great deal of dependency on India. So for many years, this relationship flourished on the basis of the open border system and the close cultural ties and economic ties. But however, over the decades, multiple challenges have come up, and today we do face some serious issues when it comes to the India Nepal relationship. It all started with the merger of Sikkim into the Indian Union in 1975. Given that Sikkim merged with India under controversial circumstances, it was alleged that India had created the crisis in the Chogyal dynasty, forcing the merger of Sikkim into India. So, this created a fear mindset. It created mistrust. So, Nepal started fearing India as a big brother, as a regional hegemon, which was interfering in the internal matters. If a kingdom like Sikkim could be subverted, and if it could be forced to join India, right? At least that is what Nepal believed. Those were the allegations, though India denies any such covert involvement. So Nepal since then started diverging from India and started cultivating parallel ties with China. It entered into very close relations, economic, security, and defense relations with China. And it would regularly play India versus China, right? Whenever it had issues with India, it would pull the China card and it would get closer to China in order to get advantages from both the sides. So this has resulted in anti-India sentiment taking root in Nepal. There are few Nepali politicians who have built their entire support base on anti-India sentiments. India even believes that China has a role to play in this. So in 1990s, when Nepal witnessed a deadly civil war triggered by the Maoists, India believed that China was backing the Maoists to destabilize the country in order to counter Indian influence in Nepal. Because until then, India was the predominant influence. But the civil war dealt a severe blow to Nepal's security and stability. Eventually, it was India which intervened to bring this civil war to an end by working out the 12-point peace agreement. India negotiated the peace between the Maoists and the Nepali government and eventually played a big role in transitioning the country from a monarchy, from a theological state, to a secular democratic republic. Yesterday, I mentioned that by 2008, Nepal had transitioned into a democracy, a secular state, a republic state, where monarchy had come to an end. It took them several more years to draft a constitution. And during the drafting process from 2008 to 2015, India was concerned about the representation of the Madhes community. India raised its voice to support the Madhesis, who allege that they have been discriminated by the Pahadi community, who are considered as the elites in Nepal. So, this ethnic division within Nepal has had an impact on its politics. So, when India stood with the Madhesi population, supported their demand for greater representation in the parliament, India supported their demand for more states to be created in southern Nepal to increase representation for the Madhesis. This was seen as Indian interference in Nepal's constitution making process. This further contributed to even more anti India sentiments. In the past, we have also seen Pakistan leveraging Nepal as a launchpad to push terrorism and intelligence operations against India, especially in 1990s and early 2000s. The ISI had set up a base in Nepal, using it as a launchpad to wage its covert proxy war against India. I'm sure all of you must know about the IC-814 hijacking, right? This aircraft was hijacked from Kathmandu. The plane was coming from Kathmandu, from the Tribhuvan International Airport. And the hijacking could not have been pulled off by Pakistani terrorists if they did not enjoy some element of local support. So India has dealt with a number of challenges and threats. But currently, the biggest concern which has come up would be the border disputes which remain unresolved. The Kala Pani dispute and the Susta dispute. These boundary disputes, they were minor issues from 1947 until 2019. In fact, these were such minor issues that it would never even dominate the headlines. But recently, anti-India leaders like KP Sharma Oli has deliberately aggravated these boundary issues post 2019. And since then, the boundary issue, the question of settling these border disputes, it keeps coming up again and again, causing friction between India and Nepal. When you look at the history of the boundary dispute here, it goes back to 1816, the Treaty of Sugoli, which was signed after the Anglo-Nepalese Wars, after the British had defeated the Nepalese kingdom. They signed the Treaty of Sugoli to demarcate the borders between British India and the Kingdom of Nepal. So while drawing these borders, as usual, the British made errors. They made mistakes. Instead of paying attention to detail on the ground, they used geographical reference points such as rivers. And this has left behind few unanswered questions as to where exactly the boundary line is present today. When you look at the Kalapani region, which today lies in the Pithoradgarh district of Uttarakhand, and it is under Indian administration. In this region, the British had used the Kali River as a reference to demarcate the international border. But in the higher reaches, the Kali has multiple branches, multiple tributaries. So the interpretation of India and Nepal varies. It is different. India considers the easternmost branch of the Kali to be the border referred in the Treaty of Sugoli, which would place Kalapani and, of course, the Limpiodura region under Indian jurisdiction. But Nepal has a different interpretation. Nepal considers the westernmost branch of Kali, which would possibly bring Limpiodura and Kalapani under Nepal's jurisdiction. Now, this dispute is extremely crucial from India's security viewpoint because the Kalapani region is home to the strategic Lipu Lake Pass, which has a lot of historical, cultural, and strategic value. Lipu Lake has been a historical route for trade and movement between Indian subcontinent and Tibet. It has been a route for cultural, religious exchange. This has been a route for the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra and remains one of the important routes for the pilgrimage even today. It has also been strategically very important because both India and China maintain a military presence. It is one of the border meeting points. It lies at the tri-junction of India, Nepal, and China. So there is a lot of speculation that leaders like KP Oli aggravated these boundary issues at the behest of China, especially after India carried out changes under Article 370, after the special status of J&K was abrogated and J&K was reorganized, with Ladakh becoming a union territory. And parallelly, India's border infrastructure started improving. For example, in the Lipu Lake stretch, India has built a strategic road that connects Darchula with Lipu Lake. This gives all-weather connectivity for the Indian Army to move the troops and equipment up till Lipu Lake. So this improves India's military preparedness. So it is believed that China has been working with anti-India leaders like KP Oli in Nepal to deliberately trigger these issues and drive a divide, a wedge between India and Nepal. So we also have another standing dispute, the Susta dispute, which also traces back to 1816, the Treaty of Sugauli. With regard to Susta, which is located between Bihar and the Terai belt, here the Gandak River, the Narayani, was used as a reference by the British. So when the treaty was signed, Susta was located on the right side bank of the Gandak, which placed it under Nepal's jurisdiction. But as you know, Himalayan rivers, they tend to meander, right? They change course with time. So now the Gandak has changed course in such a way that Susta falls on the left bank, which would technically place it under Indian control. And thus, there is a small dispute, a standing dispute present over here. So for now, resolving these disputes remain a top priority. Or else, India's engagement with Nepal will continue to suffer, and China will keep leveraging the friction between India and Nepal. And that is the biggest concern that India faces, the biggest challenge in the strategic Himalayan belt. When you look at India's hydropower investments, many of the Indian projects have faced a lot of opposition, resistance. Because, see, Nepal being a Himalayan state, it has tremendous hydropower potential, right? Because of the fast flowing rivers and the perennial rivers. But many of the Indian proposed projects, they have not really taken off or they have not been completed on time. They have faced funding delays, they have faced local protests on environmental grounds and social grounds. And India has reasons to believe that China is involved in this, that China is deliberately triggering protests at the local level to oppose Indian projects. Because on the other hand, Chinese projects have sailed smoothly. It could also be because there have been delays on India's part as well. You need to acknowledge the fact that there have been failures on India's part where India has delayed the projects, not funded them on time. But India does believe that the ground level protests are often sponsored by China through anti India politicians, which again undermines our influence. The reason why China is so obsessed with Nepal is mainly because of two reasons. One, because of Mao's five finger policy. Mao Zedong, he advocated a strategy in order to secure China's hold over Tibet. After the annexation of Tibet, in order to prevent any outside interference in Tibet, Mao Zedong propagated this strategy called the five finger policy. If you imagine Tibet to be the palm of your hand, according to Mao Zedong, Tibet has five extensions or five fingers. It's Ladakh, Nepal, Sikkim, Bhutan, and Arunachal Pradesh. And Mao Zedong's strategy is to ensure that China keeps meddling in these five fingers, in these five extensions, so that no one else will come to bother China in Tibet. That explains why China obsessively focuses on Ladakh, Arunachal Pradesh, Sikkim, Bhutan as well, and Nepal. Plus, Nepal is also home to Tibetan refugees. Just like India plays host to a large Tibetan refugee population, there are few Tibetan refugees settled in Nepal as well, and China would like to keep an eye on their activities as the refugees still continue to lead the Tibet liberation movement. So, this explains why China is making such big investments, from building schools to pushing Mandarin in Nepalese schools to building its cultural influence. It even tried to renovate Lumbini, the birth site of Lord Gautam Buddha. Though India was seeking this project, India being the birthplace of Buddhism itself. Despite that, the project was awarded to a Chinese firm. China has made rapid investments as part of the Belt and Road Initiative. Nepal has joined the BRI initiative or the One Belt, One Road project. And now China is extending road and rail network directly from Tibet into Nepal, right up to the borders with India in the Terai Belt. Take, for example, the Trans Himalayan Connectivity Network that China is executing, connecting Tibetan cities directly with Nepal's lifelines from Pokhara to Lumbini to Kathmandu. China has developed the international airport at Pokhara. Chinese loans have been provided for the Pokhara International Airport. So the extension of Chinese road and rail network into Nepal, right into the Terai Belt, which borders India, it basically presents a serious security concern for India. So these are the biggest challenges that we are dealing with regard to India-Nepal relations. Now, when you look at Bhutan, when you move to the other side of the Himalayan belt, even Bhutan occupies the same strategic location as Nepal. It is sandwiched between India and China. It is quite close to the Siliguri corridor of India, right? And don't forget, Nepal shares a direct boundary with the Siliguri corridor, which is India's chicken's neck, a choke point, the only link that connects northeast region with the rest of the country. So naturally, Bhutan acquires a lot of strategic significance because of its location. But when you look at the relations between India and Bhutan, honestly, it is a model relationship. It's almost like a perfect relationship. It is built on the 1949 treaty, under which Bhutan outsourced its foreign relations to India. As per the treaty, India was essentially given the responsibility to conduct Bhutan's foreign policy. In return, India would offer defense. India would protect Bhutan against any external threats. So that ways, India could protect its own influence and interests, ensure no outside power can interfere and meddle in this region, especially China and Western powers. And it would also work for Bhutan because India was the main provider of essential supplies, funds, and financing for key projects in Bhutan. India launched Project Dantak in 1960s, under which India has been financing road projects, hydropower projects, and key infrastructure projects in Bhutan. India continued to finance Bhutan's budget and its 5-year plans. Even today, Bhutan receives the highest budgetary allocation. When you look at the allocations that are made in the union budget for the Ministry of External Affairs, if you look at the Overseas Development Assistance Program, right, the ODA, Official Development Assistance Program of India, the highest allocation is always for Bhutan, right, which means India still plays that critical role in financing Bhutan's projects and its entire budget. So today we have a very close, deep-rooted relationship, a trust-based partnership. India has respected the monarchy, the close nature of the society, how Bhutan believes in gross national happiness. It places high priority on environment conservation, on spirituality, overall well-being and happiness. It doesn't measure growth through just GDP numbers. It is strongly opposed to polluting industries. It is against any activity that could contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. It's seen as a champion in the field of climate action, right? And it's one of the few carbon negative countries in the world. So India has respected these unique choices of Bhutan. Bhutan has chosen to remain isolated, right? India respects that. India has not imposed itself on Bhutan, and similarly, Bhutan has reciprocated. It has never allowed external powers to capitalize on this region to target India. Believe it or not, even today, Bhutan does not have relations with the P5 countries. Though Bhutan today conducts its own foreign policy, because this treaty was amended in 2007, it was revised and upgraded. So, as per the new treaty, the foreign relations of Bhutan is now being conducted by the Bhutanese government itself. India is no longer guiding Bhutan's foreign policy. However, we still have the responsibility to defend Bhutan against external threats. So, though Bhutan conducts its independent foreign policy today, it has ensured that no foreign power creates a presence for itself, which could be inimical or a danger to India. It doesn't have official diplomatic ties with any of the P5 countries, be it China, be it US, Russia, UK, France. None of the countries have a diplomatic presence here. It has very limited diplomatic ties with very few countries. So that allows India to dominate this region, exercise its influence, and protect its core interests. So almost everything seems perfect in this relationship, except for one standing issue. This is related to China Bhutan boundary dispute. China's aggression in the region and its expansionist behavior has affected Bhutan as well. And as we learned in the previous topic, under Mao Zedong's five finger policy, Bhutan is one of the five fingers, one of the five extensions of Tibet. So China has territorial claims with Bhutan as well. There are three specific locations where the boundary disputes are located. One is at Doklam, which is closer to India, closer to Sikkim, located in the Chumbi Valley. Then two other locations in the northern sector, Jakarlung and Pasamlung. Now, with regard to this boundary dispute, Both countries have been negotiating with each other. They've been holding their boundary talks since 1984. In fact, back then, India was facilitating these talks between China and Bhutan because remember, I told you Bhutan does not have official ties with China. Until 2007, India was guiding and controlling Bhutan's foreign policy. So, multiple rounds of negotiations have taken place over these three boundary disputes. But given the recent developments, especially the Doklam standoff that occurred in 2017, and the current pace at which the boundary talks have accelerated between China and Bhutan, that is something which worries India. Because, see, as I said, Bhutan today conducts its own foreign policy. It's no longer guided by India. But in 2017, when China was carrying out illegal construction in the strategic Doklam Plateau, it was resisted by the Indian army, and Indian army tried pushing back the Chinese troops. Since India is responsible for defending Bhutan against external threats, Indian army maintains a position in Bhutan and we jointly patrol these borders with Royal Bhutanese Army. So when India resisted the Chinese road construction at Doklam, it led to a major military standoff and it was resolved several months later, only after the Wuhan informal summit when Prime Minister Modi traveled to China to meet Xi Jinping and to find a solution at the highest level of the leadership to back off from the Doklam standoff. So when you look at Doklam's location, it's very close to the strategic Nathula Pass, hardly around 50 kilometers. It gives a vantage point to monitor and access the Siliguri corridor, which is India's weakness and choke point. So that's one reason why India is very clear that at any cost, Doklam should not fall under Chinese control. So with regard to the ongoing boundary talks, our fear is that China could be probably executing a creeping annexation, a step-by-step incremental annexation, which experts often refer to as the salami slicing technique. Just like how you cut salami slice by slice. Similarly, China practices a strategy where it carries out incremental, step-by-step annexation over years and decades without generating much opposition. And every time it offers to negotiate when things escalate, which is just a time buying tactic. And it ends up changing the status quo on the ground. So even after Wuhan summit over the Doklam issue, though India China had committed to withdraw the troops and back off, it has now been seen through satellite imagery that China has actually completed the construction of the road. It has even put up permanent military installations, watchtowers, and settlements at Doklam, which directly challenges Bhutan's sovereignty. So, in the last 4 or 5 years, the boundary talks between the two countries have accelerated. Post 2021, China started pushing Bhutan to negotiate, and they've resumed the talks from 2023, and expert level meetings and the joint technical teams have been meeting regularly. They've even come out with a three-step formula, a three-step roadmap to find a solution and resolve the standing boundary disputes. India's ultimate fear is that China might use its pressure tactics to propose a trade off for Doklam in order to give up Jakarlung and Pasamlung. See, China is least bothered about Jakarlung and Pasamlung, right? For China, it serves no strategic value. China would be more than willing to show this promise to Bhutan that we will give up our claims at Jakarlung and Pasamlung, right? China will end its claims over here if Bhutan agrees to give up its claims over Doklam. Because China's real interest lies in Doklam. Because in Chumbi Valley, the Y-shaped region that you saw at the tri-junction between Sikkim, Bhutan, and Tibet, China maintains a very, very strong military presence. China knows the strategic value of Nathula and Siliguri. So any further strengthening of Chinese military presence at Doklam represents a serious strategic threat for India. See, it's not that Bhutan will betray India. Bhutan has been a time-tested friend. As I said, it's a model relationship. But if Bhutan comes under increasing pressure from China, this might seem like a lucrative option, right? For a small country which is sandwiched between two giants, it would like to get away from this conflict. If China is proposing a trade off, it might seem very alluring, very lucrative, right? And Bhutan might agree someday to give up Doklam in exchange for Jakarlung and Pasamlung. And that would be a big setback for India. And that's why India is closely watching these boundary talks, closely consulting with Bhutan to ensure that this doesn't happen. And that remains our biggest challenge as far as Bhutan is concerned. Next, Afghanistan. Though Afghanistan and India do not share any borders on the ground, as I told you yesterday, India's official claim is over the entire state of J&K as it existed in 1947, before Pakistan's illegal invasion. Raja Hari Singh, the ruler of the princely state of J&K, when he signed the instrument of accession following the Pakistani tribal invasion, the whole of J&K, including Gilgit-Baltistan and the entire region of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, became an integral part of the Indian Union. Right? So today, Pakistan illegally occupies a part of this territory. Pakistan occupied Kashmir and the Gilgit-Baltistan region. So if not for that, India-Afghanistan would actually share a small border over here through this narrow land corridor. A small border of around 90 to 100 kilometers would be present. So as we maintain our official claim over the entire territory, including Pakistan occupied Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan, it's important to claim that Afghanistan is a neighboring country of India. Though on the ground we don't share any direct borders, it's important to continue the claim, which basically helps us strengthen our position over J&K. Now, can you find out which is this narrow land corridor that I'm referring to? What is the name of this land corridor? It's a vital land corridor in the Hindu Kush that extends towards Gilgit-Baltistan that would give us direct access into Afghanistan if Pakistan had not illegally occupied these territories. From here, we could have even accessed Central Asian countries like Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. So please find out the name of this narrow land corridor in the Hindu Kush and please mention that in the comments below. Now, when we look at Afghanistan, we have faced multiple challenges in the past. Back then, in 1996, when Taliban came to power for the first time, following the Afghan civil war, the Taliban was a mere puppet of the Pakistani deep state, controlled by the Pakistani intelligence, the ISI. And Pakistan was using Taliban as a strategic depth. It was using the Afghan soil and the Afghan territory to basically breed anti-India terror groups. As part of Pakistan's covert warfare against India, it was using Afghan soil and Afghan territory to cultivate anti-India terror groups, from Kashmir-centric terror groups like Lashkar-e-Toiba, Hizbul Mujahideen, Harkatul Mujahideen, to Khalistani outfits. They were all sheltered along the Af-Pak border region, where Pakistan had created an entire terror ecosystem. And Taliban was a willing puppet. So during this period, India had a very difficult equation with the Taliban. India had cut off all diplomatic ties. Taliban had even kicked out the Indian diplomatic presence. India had shut its embassy. We saw the Taliban as a terror outfit. And India opposed Taliban's targeting of religious minorities and especially the violation of gender rights, the targeting of women, and how Taliban was hosting anti-India terror groups at the behest of Pakistan. So this had destroyed any relations between India and Taliban. So when the 9/11 terror attacks happened in 2001 and the United States led an international coalition force from NATO, which was sanctioned by the UN Security Council and invaded Afghanistan, they toppled the Taliban regime and installed a civilian government in Afghanistan. So when Afghanistan came under a civilian government backed by Western countries, backed by the United States, this was a golden period for India-Afghan relations. It lasted for 2 decades, from 2001 to 2021. So when the foreign troops were present, the NATO alliance troops led by US, they were directly countering terrorism, targeting Taliban, Al-Qaeda and other terror factions, including the Haqqani network. This created a fertile opportunity for India. India reached out to the Afghan civilian government and built a fantastic relationship with the then Afghan governments. Under leaders like Hamid Karzai, Ashraf Ghani, India became one of the biggest investors in the reconstruction of Afghanistan. especially under the Manmohan Singh government, India pumped up to $3 to $4 billion to take up strategic projects in Afghanistan. India constructed the parliament building in Kabul to strengthen its democracy. India built schools and hospitals to strengthen education and healthcare. India constructed the Salma hydropower dam to generate electricity to supply water for drinking and irrigation, which is located in the Herat province. India constructed the Zaranj Delaram highway that you can see here, a strategic link that connects with Iran and links with the Kabul highway. India's grand ambition was through this road link, we could connect with the strategic Chabahar port in Iran through a road and rail network, which could then extend into Central Asia as well, giving us direct access into Central Asian countries, which could allow us to tap Afghan resources like iron ore, which could allow us to tap Central Asian resources from natural gas to hydrocarbons to critical minerals to uranium. This was the grand ambition of India. And all these dreams of India and Afghanistan, it came crashing down in 2021 when Donald Trump struck a deal with the devil itself. The US, which had become desperate in this war, they were desperately seeking a face saving exit. And in 2020, under Trump's first presidency, the US struck a deal, the Doha Peace Agreement, with the Taliban. By then, the Taliban had regrouped, it had revived itself, it had even taken back some territorial control, especially in its stronghold areas like Kandahar and southern and eastern parts of Afghanistan, where Taliban has a major presence. As soon as US struck the deal and started pulling out the troops, by 2021, the new president, Biden, had pulled out all the American troops by June, July 2021. And once the US exit was completed, immediately Taliban ran over the country. They took all major cities, key roads, and border crossing points, and finally captured Kabul and toppled the Afghan civilian government, which was friendly towards India. So when Taliban came back to power in 2021, it was like a deja vu moment for India. India immediately evacuated all the remaining Indian nationals, workers, and diplomats under Operation Devi Shakti. And following this, we shut our diplomatic ties. India shut its embassy and consulates. By then, we had expanded our diplomatic presence. We not only had an embassy in Kabul, we had a consulate in every major city from Kandahar to Jalalabad to Herat to Mazar-e Sharif. That is the extent of Indian diplomatic presence that had been created. So all of this was scaled back in 2021. But since all major countries were engaging with Taliban, they were talking to Taliban, making deals with Taliban, India also started opening up slowly. After the US Taliban deal, major powers like Iran, Russia, China, even European powers, they were maintaining their channels with the Taliban. In fact, Russia went on to become the only country to officially recognize the new Taliban regime. See, as of today, no country in the world recognizes Taliban except for Russia. So, if all the major powers were striking deals with Taliban to secure their interests, pragmatism dictates that India should also engage in a similar realistic foreign policy. So, we started opening up to Taliban step by step. First, India met with Taliban officials in Doha, in Qatar, where Taliban maintained a political office. Then, India started sending out relief material, food aid, and assistance because Afghanistan was suffering from food shortage. Right? Afghan people have always been great friends of India. India enjoys a great soft power influence across Afghanistan. So India helped out the Afghan people by providing for food supplies. Then, when Afghanistan was hit by disasters like earthquakes and floods, India provided HADR assistance, disaster management, and relief supplies were sent. So this started building a channel with the Taliban. And now India has started very high level engagement. Within a few years, the relationship has now completely transformed. It has taken a complete U turn. Last year, India's Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri met with Taliban's Foreign Minister Amir Khan Mutaki in Dubai. Then, after the Pahalgam attack and Operation Sindoor, Amir Khan Mutaki called India's Foreign Minister Dr. Jaishankar held a telephonic conversation, blamed Pakistan for the Pahalgam attack, supported India's military action against Pakistan. Look at how tables have turned around. As they say in geopolitics, there are no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, only permanent interests. Pakistan had cultivated the very same Taliban as a puppet. And today, the same Taliban has turned against Pakistan. And as you know, they are currently at conflict. Over the past 1.5 to 2 years, there has been a direct conflict between them over the TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, or the Pakistan faction of Taliban. The Afghan Taliban sees the Pakistan Taliban as a brother organization. The TTP has been given a shelter in Afghanistan, and the Taliban regime provides all kinds of support. It was the Afghan Taliban regime which had made a deal between Pakistan and the TTP to prevent the TTP from attacking the Pakistani state. A ceasefire had been worked out. But after Pakistan mistreated the Afghan people, the Pashtuns, the Afghan refugees, after Pakistan disrespected the Talibani sovereignty, because see, this time the Taliban wants to project its rule, it wants to exercise its sovereignty and govern Afghanistan. It is seeking recognition from across the world. It simply doesn't want to be a puppet of the Pakistani deep state. They've realized that last time, when they willingly became a puppet of the Pakistani deep state, Taliban lost its relevance. It lost any kind of influence at the global level. So this time, the Taliban is slightly different. They want that recognition. They want to be seen as a sovereign or legitimate state of Afghanistan. So Pakistan cannot stomach that. It can't tolerate that. Pakistan has disrespected the Taliban regime and its sovereignty. It even threw out the Afghan refugees and mistreated the Pashtuns. So naturally, there is a division that has come up, and Taliban has targeted the Pakistani state. It has given a free hand to the TTP, breaking that ceasefire, and TTP's attacks have gone up, as you have seen in news reports. From Balochistan to Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, from Karachi to Islamabad, multiple attacks are being executed by the TTP, posing a serious threat to the Pakistani state. So Pakistan has retaliated by attacking Afghanistan, bombing Afghan territory, killing Afghan civilians. So direct conflict has broken out over the last few months between Afghan Taliban and the Pakistani state. So these are very interesting and surprising developments that have taken place. So following this outreach from India, last year Amir Khan Mutaki, the foreign minister, visited India. The first time ever such a high level Talibani leader is visiting India as a dignitary. India not only threw open the doors and gave a red carpet welcome, but we have extended a lot of support and assistance in the field of health, education, in the field of disaster management. India has been at the forefront of providing aid and assistance. We have reopened our diplomatic mission, restored it to the status of a full fledged embassy, but we have stopped short of giving full fledged recognition to the Taliban regime. Even Taliban's other senior ministers, the health minister, commerce, and agriculture ministers, have visited India. So the relations are flourishing at an unofficial level. But India is just holding back from giving diplomatic recognition to the Taliban regime. So these interesting developments are largely driven by the Pakistani angle. That is definitely one of the core factors. India would also like to protect its investments in Afghanistan. We don't want the $3 to $4 billion that we have invested to go down the drain. India would like to maintain access to these strategic projects, and that can happen only if the Taliban could allow it. Right? Plus, the friction and the divide between Pakistan and Taliban today could potentially work in India's favor. For decades, Pakistan has used Afghan territory. It has leveraged its ties with Taliban to breed anti India terrorism. So finally, things have come around, and it presents an opportunity where potentially India and Taliban could work together to contain a common threat, which is Pakistan. So Pakistan represents a common threat to both the neighbors, to both India and Afghanistan. So that's one of the biggest challenges in our diplomacy today. To what extent can we trust the Taliban? Because Taliban remains a radical outfit. Don't even believe for a second the Taliban has reformed, right? It remains the same brutal organization. It remains the same radical extremist entity targeting minorities, targeting women. Its external appearance is slightly different because they crave recognition, right? Otherwise, it's still the same radical extremist outfit. Of course, for India, there is another motivation because without Afghanistan, Chabahar port is pretty much useless. The entire Chabahar port project of India with Iran was designed to give us access to Afghanistan and Central Asia. So the ties we are building with Taliban will help us maintain those connectivity routes and trade routes without which we cannot access Central Asia. But the war in Iran and the current conflict between US, Iran, and Israel and Iran has completely turned everything upside down. Plus, there is a lot of pressure on India from the United States, right, to cut down our investments, to cut off any contact and relations with Iran. India already zeroed out oil imports back in 2018 following the pressure of the Trump administration. Recently, we have brought our investments in Chabahar port to zero. If you look at this year's budget, the budgetary allocation to Chabahar port is zero. So this has raised questions about the future prospects of this trade corridor. But in 2017, we had activated this route through a trilateral agreement between Iran, Afghanistan, and India. We had activated this trade route for a brief period. So even now, there is that potential, maybe in the future, once the Iran war settles, if things normalize, if our ties with Taliban further improves, there is a possibility of reviving the Chabahar trade route to link directly with Afghanistan and Central Asia to access the resources and build a mutually beneficial partnership. But the biggest roadblock, the biggest challenge that we will face is the dilemma on what extent can we trust the Taliban, right? Can we give recognition to the Taliban regime? Because the world's largest democracy recognizing a radical extremist regime will raise a lot of questions. And also, don't forget, much of the Taliban leaders are UN designated terrorists. The supreme leader, Akhundzada, himself is a designated terrorist by the 1267 Sanctions Committee of the UN Security Council. Then Amir Khan Mutaki, their foreign minister, is also a designated terrorist. Then if you look at Sirajuddin Haqqani, the leader of the Haqqani network, today he is the interior minister, basically the home minister of Afghanistan. But it's Haqqani faction, which is a branch of the Taliban, which was responsible for deadly attacks against Indian embassy and consulates, which killed Indian diplomats, Indian military and intelligence officers. It was used by the ISI as a proxy to target Indian diplomatic presence. But today, the leader of Haqqani network, Sirajuddin Haqqani, has become the interior minister. So how do you engage with such a regime, which is loaded and filled with designated terrorists who are responsible for attacks against Indian diplomats, against Indian projects? Do we recognize the regime or not? So this will remain our biggest challenge. Then when you look eastwards towards Myanmar, Myanmar represents another big crisis for India. See, Myanmar is historically known for its political instability. In 1962, the military toppled the government and staged a coup. And since then, the country has been ruled by the military junta for decades. For a brief period, it made a transition towards democracy from 2010 to 2020. In 2010, partial democracy was introduced through partial democratic reforms. In 2015, the country had made a transition towards full fledged democracy with the introduction of free and fair elections. But in 2021, the military has again staged a coup, declaring an emergency, fearing that it would lose control. It nullified the elections, alleged that election results were manipulated, and prevented the National League for Democracy, the NLD, from taking power. It has targeted pro-democracy leaders like Aung San Suu Kyi, the Nobel Peace Laureate. It has crushed any political opposition, and it has established a firm, strong foothold in the politics of Myanmar. Now, Myanmar is extremely critical for us. It shares a 1,643-kilometer border with states like Arunachal Pradesh, Manipur, Nagaland, and Mizoram. This entire border is highly porous. The terrain is very complicated because of hilly mountainous region, dense forests, few rivers cutting across the border as well. Plus, a lot of indigenous communities on both the sides are connected to each other. For example, the Nagas in Nagaland, right? They're related to each other. There are Nagas found in Myanmar as well. If you look at the Mizo community in Mizoram, they are connected to the Chin community on the other side. If you look at the Kukis in Manipur, they are linked with the Zomi community on the other side of the border. So there is a regular cross-border movement of people which takes place because of the close ethnic connections they share. And this has enabled Northeast insurgents to take advantage of this delicate border. Northeast insurgent groups like NSCN, the Naga insurgent outfit, then other insurgent organizations from Ulfa to Manipur based insurgent outfits like Kuki armed groups and Methi armed groups in the Imphal Valley. In the past, Mizo armed ethnic groups. All these insurgent organizations have taken shelter across the border and they have found safe havens, often backed and supported with Chinese funds and Chinese weapons. India believes that Chinese intelligence, the MSS, Ministry of State Security, to be waging a covert war against India to destabilize the Northeast by using Myanmar as a base. And this region is also part of the Golden Triangle, which we studied in yesterday's session. Countries like Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, these entire this entire region is a hub of organized crime, from drug trafficking to arms trafficking, from cyber scams and frauds to wildlife trafficking. And this is all linked with the insurgent terror activities that flourishes in this region. The military regime has tolerated and encouraged these criminal cartels because they take a part of the commission, right? They essentially get funded by these criminal cartels and they run a multi-billion dollar empire by involving in these criminal activities. So the overall instability present in Myanmar and in this part of Southeast Asia becomes a serious concern and challenge for India. But please understand, Myanmar is very critical because it's like a land bridge that connects India with Southeast Asia. Because Myanmar is not a South Asian country, it's a Southeast Asian country. It gives us access to the rest of Southeast Asia, from Vietnam to Malaysia and Thailand. So there are plenty of opportunities that we can expect if India Myanmar relations can flourish. India has maintained good ties with Myanmar's military regime. We have approached this with a very realistic view. We have ignored Myanmar's human right violations, be it in 1960s, 1980s, or even recently, when the military crushed the pro-democracy movement and used brutal force against civilians. India never criticized the military for that. Though we urged for peace and calm and restoration of democracy, we never condemned the military regime. That's a realistic policy India has been following in order to counter Chinese influence. India even ignored Western sanctions, bypassed American and European sanctions for decades. And India has invested in Myanmar, supplied arms, funds, and military technology to Myanmar as well. We have donated a submarine to Myanmar's navy. We have conducted joint insurgency, counterinsurgency operations. We share close intelligence ties. So we do maintain a big presence and influence in Myanmar, but the instability affects our investments and key projects. When it comes to connectivity, the IMT highway, the India, Myanmar, Thailand trilateral highway that connects Moreh with Mandalay, Yangon, and Mesot. This project has been delayed for years and years. It was proposed under Look East policy. Now it has been more than a decade of implementing Act East policy, and even now the project is not completed because of the sanctions on Myanmar, because of the conflict and the instability, right? And Myanmar is the only country where our Neighbourhood First Policy and as well as the Act East policy of India will apply. It's not just a neighboring country of India, it's also a Southeast Asian country. So both Neighbourhood First and Act East policy will apply. But the main focus, which is on connectivity projects, that is something which has been hampered by the instability and the crisis. Look at the Kaladan project, a massive multimodal transit transport corridor that seeks to connect Kolkata with the strategic Sitwe port, developed by India, operated by Adani ports, which can give us alternate access to the northeast via the Kaladan River. It involves river navigation or inland navigation, then a road that would link directly with Mizoram. But again, the project has been delayed for many, many years. Now, when you compare this with the Chinese investments under the Belt and Road Initiative, China is miles ahead of India. Myanmar is not only part of the Belt and Road Initiative, China has completed the CMEC corridor, China Myanmar Economic Corridor, through which China has connected the Yunnan province from Kunming to strategic ports such as Kyokfu, which is part of the Belt and Road Initiative, which is right next to the Indian built Sitwe port. It is connected with key cities like Yangon and Mandalay through road and rail networks, industrial clusters, oil pipelines. China is even extracting oil, gas, hydrocarbons from Bay of Bengal, where Myanmar has um, resources present in its exclusive economic zone. So China has created an alternate route to connect and access the Indian Ocean and bypass the Malacca Strait. See, Malacca Strait represents a choke point for China. China depends on Malacca heavily, mainly to procure West Asian oil and gas. It always fears a possible blockade at Malacca, either by India or US. That is referred to as the Chinese Malacca dilemma. Now, through CMEC corridor, China can completely bypass Malacca. It need not depend on the sea route. If it has this network with Myanmar linking directly with Bay of Bengal and Indian Ocean, China will get a significant advantage as it can bypass Malacca Strait. So China has maintained this very strong presence, and that becomes one of our biggest challenges in Myanmar. Apart from that, we are now dealing with a massive crisis because of the cyber scam compounds that have come up from Myanmar to Cambodia. There's an entire organized criminal nexus where Indian youth are being tricked in the name of jobs, and they are being pushed into these cyber scam compounds, into cyber slavery, where thousands of Indians have been trapped and they're being forced to commit cyber crimes against fellow Indians. These cyber crimes, which involves crypto frauds, romance scams, or honey traps, or even digital arrest scams, this has led to significant financial losses for Indians and represents a economic and as well as national security threat. So dealing with all these challenges remains our biggest diplomatic hurdle when it comes to Myanmar. Then when you look at Bangladesh, Bangladesh is probably one of the most important neighbor, mainly because we share the longest land border stretching to 4,096 kilometers. We also share 54 transboundary rivers, and Bangladesh is very critical for the overall stability and development of the Northeast region because Northeast India is landlocked. If the Northeast region has to access the sea, if it has to access Bay of Bengal for alternate connectivity, for engaging with global markets, then Bangladesh is vital. Bangladesh can give us alternate connectivity routes, which can help us bypass Malacca Strait, which can help us, sorry, bypass Siliguri. Siliguri, which is India's biggest weak point, right? As far as connectivity with Northeast India is concerned, India can bypass its weakness at Siliguri, just like China can bypass its weakness at Malacca through its investments in Myanmar. In a similar fashion, India can create alternate connectivity routes because connectivity through Siliguri is very challenging, right? Because of the difficult terrain and geography, it's much harder to build road and railway infrastructure through Siliguri corridor. So Bangladesh can be that alternate connectivity link that can open us up with different routes, either road and land routes or inland navigation, and give us alternate connectivity into the northeast region and bypass the entire weakness at Siliguri corridor. So for all these reasons, Bangladesh is absolutely critical. And when you share such a long border, border security becomes very critical. And this border is also very porous, just like the border with Myanmar or Nepal, because of the dense population towards West Bengal or the dense forests and the hilly mountainous terrain and rivers present towards the northeast, because of which the border becomes very porous. It has become a flourishing ground for illegal migration into India. It has enabled organized criminal activities from drug trafficking to arms trafficking. Bangladesh has often been a safe haven for insurgent and terrorist organizations, which are often backed by Pakistan and radical forces in Bangladesh. So, insurgent groups like NSC and ULFA, NDFB, and others have found a base in Bangladesh. Even Pakistan sponsored terror organizations like Harkatul Mujahideen and Huji, and even Lashkar, right? And of late, Al Qaeda. They've all found a presence in Bangladesh, which presents a major threat for India. So, when it comes to connectivity, Bangladesh can offer multiple routes, alternate routes to link with the Northeast region, either by interconnecting our railway networks. For example, how the Agartala Akura railway link and the Kolkata Dhaka connectivity, right? This gives us multiple access points to ensure that Northeast region is opened up to the sea route and as well as to the rest of the country. Or the inland navigation routes, where India has made investments at Mongla Port, Chattogram or Chittagong Port, to connect the inland navigation routes over Ganga, Brahmaputra, and the Barak, and connect the national waterways with the networks in Bangladesh to link this with the Northeast region. These projects have been vital. These projects were going well as far as India Bangladesh relations were on the right track under Sheikh Hasina. Right? When Sheikh Hasina remained in power and the Awami League government ensured a favorable position towards India from 2009 to 2024, the relations were on a very good trajectory. Though we had certain issues like the unresolved Teesta water dispute or other minor issues like Faraka barrage and the others, India Bangladesh shared a fantastic relationship under the Awami League government headed by then Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. But today things have taken a turn, right? See, Bangladesh has always seen a fundamental split in its society. On one side, you have the pro India nationalists, the ones who've mainly fought in the liberation of Bangladesh war. For example, the Awami League, the supporters of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and Sheikh Hasina. They represent the secular Bengali nationalist faction, which has always maintained a pro India outlook. But there is a major split over here with pro Pakistan radical Islamists on the other side. You have radical organizations like the Jamaat, even political parties like the BNP, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, which has now come to power again. So these elements have often been alleged to have links with terrorist organizations and Pakistan's intelligence agency. And they have often created a major threat for India by sheltering and nurturing anti India terror groups. So, the rise of Al Qaeda Islamic State, the targeting of religious minorities, particularly Bengali Hindu population, has all been linked with the radical activities of the Jamaat and poses a serious challenge for India's diplomacy when it comes to Bangladesh. And when we had the interim regime last year under Muhammad Yunus, after Sheikh Hasina's government was toppled following the large scale July protests in 2024, and Sheikh Hasina took refuge in India, the interim regime under Muhammad Yunus embraced China, Pakistan, and even Turkey. And this has caused some alarm for India. Now, China has made massive investments in Bangladesh as well under Belt and Road Initiative. China is a key arms and weapons supplier to Bangladesh. China has announced fresh investments in the strategic Mongla port. It has announced a water management project over the Teesta River, which is disputed with India. China has even built a submarine yard, and Bangladeshi Navy has currently two operational submarines, but this yard can hold up to 8 submarines. So if Bangladesh has only two operational submarines, then what are the other six docking yards built for? That raises suspicion that whether China will use the Pekua submarine base potentially for docking Chinese submarines of the PLA Navy. Even Mohammad Yunus made very controversial statements when he visited China. He invited China to play a role in Northeast India. He said Bangladesh is the guardian of the Bay of Bengal, which was a clear threat to the Northeast region. There have been radical student leaders who have issued threats against India, talking about cutting off Siliguri or supporting insurgent groups and terror groups against India. There have been reports that China has been given access to the Lal Monirhat Air Base, which is very close to the Indian border, hardly 15 kilometers from the Indian border, and just 135 kilometers from the Siliguri corridor. So the growing Chinese presence and Pakistani presence, and Bangladesh even buying weapons from Turkey, including the Bayraktar drones, represents a serious challenge today. Then there is another angle here. There are reports of a greater game going on between US and China, which is undermining India's interest in Bangladesh. It has been alleged that US is trying to directly counter China in the Indian Ocean, particularly in Bay of Bengal. It has been alleged that the US was probably involved in the 2024 protests that toppled Sheikh Hasina. According to Sheikh Hasina herself, US reportedly had demanded Bangladesh to give up access to St. Martin's Island, a strategic island over here in Bay of Bengal, where US most likely wanted to build a military base. Sheikh Hasina has alleged that when she refused, the protests began immediately against her regime. She has alleged a foreign hand, indicating that US was somehow involved in the toppling of her regime. How far is it true? We don't know. But one thing is certain, that there is a much bigger great game being played in Bangladesh, in India's own backyard, which goes against our own interests. If the US is very eager to counter China, it should have ideally worked with India. Instead, it's been reported that the US is acting on its own, be it in Myanmar, be it in Bangladesh. It's alleged that US intelligence is involved in backing some of the armed groups in Myanmar as well, which are essentially fighting against Myanmar's military regime, right? Recently, an American private mercenary was detained in India. You must have heard about Matthew Van Dyke, right? And there are reports about his previous links with the CIA. And he was working with Myanmar's armed insurgent group, supplying them drones, giving them advanced guerrilla warfare training. All of this raises a lot of doubts, a lot of suspicion about a greater game, a much bigger covert game in the region, in India's own backyard, in Bangladesh and Myanmar, which could be going against our own interests. So that's why the eastern neighborhood has become very, very vulnerable. After the recent elections, the BNP has come back to power under a new leader, under Tariq Rahman. Though India has reached out to Tariq Rahman, offering a hand of friendship, it appears that Bangladesh is not very keen because it has certain unresolved issues with India. For example, the issue of illegal migration, how it has been politicized in border states like Assam and West Bengal. You saw that during the recent state elections, how a communal color has been given to it, mainly because of domestic electoral politics. And this has backfired, right? The policy of pushing back alleged illegal migrants forcefully, and the refusal by the Indian side to resolve the Tista water sharing issue. All these have created difficult uh, circumstances for the relationship. Right now, the biggest demand of BNP is that India should hand over Sheikh Hasina. India should extradite Sheikh Hasina because she has been delivered the death penalty. As of now, Sheikh Hasina remains in India seeking asylum, but she recently held a press conference. She has said about going back to Bangladesh to enter politics, to face the trial. But as long as Sheikh Hasina remains in India, it remains a difficult challenge because it will create an uncomfortable friction with the new Bangladeshi government. So Bangladesh remains a major challenge. As you can see, in every neighboring country, we have one or the other big challenge lying in front of us. Now, coming to the last part of my discussion, when you look at the Indian Ocean, right, the vast Indian Ocean to which India's future is tied, our economic and national security is tied. Historically, India has exercised influence through maritime trade, cultural export, through military dominance. So, from West Asia to East Africa, from South Asia to Southeast Asia, India has been a predominant power all across the Indian Ocean, right, since ancient times till date. So, when you look at Indian Ocean, there are multiple choke points which are present, from Hormuz Strait to Bab el Mandeb to Mozambique Channel, the Malacca Strait, multiple security threats. At Horn of Africa, you have Somalian pirates posing a major threat for shipping. Now you have the ongoing war and the blockade of Hormuz in West Asia, and the presence of the Houthis in Yemen targeting shipping through Red Sea route and vessels passing through Bab el Mandeb and Gulf of Aden. So all these security challenges pose a direct threat for India's economy, for India's exports and imports, and even for our national security. So India believes that Indian Ocean is our own strategic backyard, where India would desire to be the most dominant influence in this region. Now, in 2015, India launched the Sagar Doctrine, security and growth for all countries in the region. It has now been upgraded to the Mahasagar Doctrine. Last year, PM Modi upgraded Sagar to Mahasagar Doctrine, mutual and holistic advancement of security and growth across regions. It has now expanded into a Indo-Pacific vision, whereas Sagar Doctrine was largely restricted to Indian Ocean region. So through this particular vision, India wants to emerge as a net security provider of this region. India would like to respond to any crisis that develops in the region, and India would like to act as the first responder, be it an economic crisis in Sri Lanka, or a disaster in Maldives, or let's say a concern in Seychelles, or an oil spill in Mauritius. Whatever be the crisis across Indian Ocean and now even the Indo-Pacific, India wants to emerge as the first responder to provide military support, disaster management assistance, economic assistance, create opportunities for the growth of these small island nations. And that essentially is your concept of net security provider. This will help keep the outside powers away from Indian Ocean, be it China, be it United States, or anyone else. India wants to champion the blue economy model, which is a sustainable model of exploiting oceanic resources. Now, when you look at Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka lies at the very heart of the Indian Ocean. And as we studied yesterday, the biggest challenge in Sri Lanka has been the ethnic divide between the Sinhalese, who are majority Buddhists, as you can see in the demographic map, versus the Tamil minorities. And I told you yesterday about the two categories of Tamils in Sri Lanka. The Sri Lankan Tamils, who had migrated over centuries and settled mainly in northern and eastern provinces, and the Indian Tamils, who migrated more recently as indentured laborers under British rule to work in the Sri Lankan highlands and the plantations run by the British companies. So, as the Sinhalese started discriminating against the Tamils, which turned into ethnic communal violence and triggered the Tamil militancy in the 1970s and 80s, it was alleged that India was backing Tamil militant groups like LTTE. The civil war destroyed the country. Eventually, India backed out from its support. It tried to bring peace to the island. It negotiated with both the LTTE and the Sri Lankan government and worked out the 1987 Indo Sri Lanka Peace Accord, under which the LTTE was supposed to surrender. India deployed the IPKF, the Indian Peacekeeping Forces, to enforce the ceasefire. Sri Lanka was supposed to retreat all the troops to the barracks, and it was expected to implement a constitutional amendment, the 13th Amendment. But this entire strategy of India backfired. Both LTT and Sri Lanka, though they signed the agreement, they backed out at the last minute. The IPKF troops became the targets for LTT. Reportedly, Sri Lanka passed on the information about the presence of Indian troops to LTT because both had a grudge against India. So many IPKF soldiers were brutally slaughtered. Close to 900 plus Indian casualties were reported. It became a disastrous involvement, right? Even contributed to the declining popularity of then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. But the point is, when it comes to 13th Amendment, which is a key constitutional promise that Sri Lanka had made to India, this amendment was supposed to deliver better rights and representation to the Tamil minorities. Under the 13th Amendment, Sri Lanka was supposed to recognize the Tamil language as one of the official languages on par with Sinhalese. And also, it was supposed to grant autonomy and devolve powers to the northern and eastern provinces. Though Sri Lanka implemented 13th Amendment, it has been a partial implementation. Autonomous councils were created. But however, all the promised powers have not been devolved. There is an autonomous council for the northern province. There is an autonomous council for the eastern province. But key subjects like policing, land, public order, these important subjects have been retained by the central government, the federal government. So, full implementation of 13th Amendment is India's priority, and we are still pushing for it. Even recently, India has brought up the issue of the 13th Amendment, reminded Sri Lanka of its promise. Though it recognized Tamil as one of the official languages, the other promises remain unfulfilled. Elections are not held on time, and key subjects have not been devolved, including financial powers, which makes 13th Amendment ineffective and partial. So, pushing Sri Lanka to fully implement the 13th Amendment remains our biggest diplomatic challenge. See, now we have a new government in Sri Lanka, right? Anura Kumara Dissanayake from the JVP party represents a new hope for Sri Lanka after its devastating economic crisis. India does have an opportunity to work together and repair all the friction points and relations which have been affected in the past. When you look at the fishermen issue and the Kachativo Island issue, these remain standing issues even today, right? The controversial transfer of Kachativo, which has been turned into a political blame game, though it was a strategic decision, right? Though it was done in an unconstitutional manner, giving away Kachativu at that point served a strategic interest because India got the watch bank in return, which is much more valuable for India. But again, the issue over Kachativu, which has lasted for a long time, and the fishermen issue, where Indian fishermen cross over into Sri Lankan exclusive economic zone, they often get targeted by Sri Lankan Coast Guard and Navy. They are even detained or killed. It has often led to clashes between Indian and Sri Lankan fishermen. This remains an unresolved issue. It reverberates in Tamil Nadu, in Puducherry, and it erupts into a big political controversy. So, finding solutions to the fishermen dispute and keeping aside the Kachativu issue, which is a settled matter, and pushing Sri Lanka to fully implement the 13th Amendment, these remain our biggest diplomatic challenges in Sri Lanka. And one final challenge here is China's continuing presence, especially under the Rajapaksa brothers, under Mahinda Rajapaksa and Gotabaya Rajapaksa. China built a massive presence for itself from early 2000s to 2022. China not only funded the Rajapaksa brothers' war against LTTE, China supplied advanced arms and weapons and gave diplomatic support as well to completely shield Sri Lanka from allegations of human rights violations and war crimes in the last phase of the civil war against the LTTE. It supplied advanced arms, weapons, and funds that helped Sri Lanka and the Rajapaksa brothers to defeat LTTE in 2009. Following which, Chinese projects and investments were stepped up, be it the strategic Hambantota port and the Matala airport, or the Colombo port project and the Lotus Tower, and the East Container Terminal, which was actually supposed to be executed by India and Japan as part of the Asia Africa Growth Corridor. All these key projects have built up Chinese presence and influence. Yes, India has often countered this with its own investments, but traditionally our investments have concentrated in the northern and eastern provinces, mainly to benefit the Tamil community. But now India has diversified. India has managed to win the contract for the Western Container Terminal at Colombo, which is now being executed by the Adani Group. Recently, NTPC has launched a power project at Sampur in eastern Sri Lanka. Then at the strategic Trincomalee port, India has won a contract to refurbish the oil tank farms, which are outdated. India has also won a renewable energy project in the Park Strait for solar and wind farms that's coming up in the Park Strait region. In the past, we have revived the Kanke Senturai port, the Northern Railway track, the Palale Civilian Airport, and built thousands of houses for the Tamil minorities who are displaced by the conflict that lasted for decades. So, though India has countered China, China still maintains a big presence and it has often pushed Sri Lanka into a debt trap. Through its debt trap diplomacy, China has now gained control over Hambantota port for 99 years. Since Sri Lanka could not repay the loans and Hambantota project failed commercially, A Chinese company has now taken over the project for a 99-year lease. So this remains one of the other challenges in Sri Lanka. Then, when you look at Maldives, the last neighboring country under today's discussion, because Pakistan and China will cover it separately in the next week's classes. When you look at Maldives, it's another vital country that has a strategic location in the Indian Ocean. It's very vulnerable mainly because of its geography. It's not a contiguous country, it's made up of thousands of islands called atolls, essentially coral structures sitting on the underwater ridge, the Chagos Lakadiv ridge that stretches from Mauritius towards Lakshadweep. So, Maldives is another key neighboring country, mainly because of its location. It sits at the heart of the trade routes. It gives a prominent presence to monitor activities in the Indian Ocean. But here, China has again built a very strong presence for itself. See, yesterday I gave you a brief introduction about Maldives in the previous session. We spoke about Maldives being ruled by an authoritarian ruler, Maumoon Gayoom, from 1970s to 2008 for more than 3 decades. But Maumoon Gayoom was a great friend of India, right? India even saved Maldives in 1988 when it was attacked by a Tamil militant outfit under Operation Cactus. India had supplied military hardware, provided defense support, trained their armed forces. India maintained a constant military presence here, mainly to safeguard the large exclusive economic zone of Maldives. Right? We have donated aircraft, warships. So our military presence is very evident in countries like Maldives. So until 2012, relations were fantastic between the two nations. Even after Maldives transitioned into a democracy from 2008, we had a very good partnership with Mohammad Nasheed of the Maldivian Democratic Party. But after 2012, after China made a diplomatic presence by opening its embassy, we started seeing trouble in the politics of Maldives. The democratically elected government of Mohammad Nasheed was toppled, and an interim government was formed under Yamin Gayoom, who turned out to be an anti India and pro China leader. Under Yamin Gayoom, many key projects of India were given away to China. For example, the Malé Airport project, which was being executed by our Indian company called GMR Infrastructure, it was given off to a Chinese company. Then China saw Maldives as part of its string of pearls strategy to encircle India in the Indian Ocean. It built the China Maldives Friendship Bridge, the Sinamale Bridge, to link the capital with a nearby island. It took over an entire island called Fedu Finolu, where China has built a port and a runway facility which could potentially have a military application, which could potentially be used by Chinese Air Force and Navy to take logistical support, right? China even has signed a free trade agreement with Maldives, and it has become one of the biggest investors. So, when you compare this with the challenges India has been facing, especially after the recent elections under the new leader Mohammad Muizu, as I told you yesterday, Mohammad Muizu was a prodigy of Yamin Gayoom, who was leading the anti India campaign, the India Out campaign. So, as soon as he came to power, he demanded that India remove all the Indian troops that were stationed in Maldives. See, India deployed a small contingent mainly to maintain the surveillance and reconnaissance aircraft and vessels that we had gifted to Maldives. We have gifted the Dornier aircraft and as well as the ALH Dhruv helicopters, which mainly helps in search and rescue, in maritime surveillance, to airlift patients as well. So, Indian military hardware that has been gifted has really helped Maldives. So, to maintain the equipment to operate them, a small Indian contingent of troops were often deployed. But Mohammad Muizu made this a very big issue and he called for India out, for Indian troops to be removed. So, India conceded. India withdrew the troops, but we convinced Mohammad Muizu to retain the Indian aircraft and the defense equipment we had donated. So we have replaced the military personnel with civilian personnel from HAL so that at least Maldives can continue to use the Indian aircraft and the helicopters. So Indian troops were removed in 2023 as per the demands of Maldives. By 2024, we completed the withdrawal of the troops and they have all been replaced by civilian personnel from HAL just to maintain the equipment. But the controversy that broke out later after PM Modi visited Lakshadweep, promoted Lakshadweep and its tourism, This led to a big backlash from Maldives, including from ministers in the government of Mohammad Muizu. They used abusive language against the prime minister, against Indians, and this triggered the outrage of Indian social media. It led to a campaign called hashtag boycott Maldives, where Indians started canceling their vacation plans to Maldives, which delivered a big hit to the Maldivian economy. This damaged the India Maldives relations. But what finally brought back some normalcy in the relationship is the financial necessity that Maldives has with India. Finally, Mohammad Moizu realized how important India is. Why Maldives in the past has always followed a India First policy. When you look at leaders like Mamoon Gayoom, Mohammad Nasheed, they always followed India First policy. They would give India the first priority. Why? Because they knew that Maldives needs India's help and assistance, be it for basic supplies, for tourism, and more importantly, for financial support when Maldives faces a liquidity crisis. Because it's a very small economy dependent heavily on tourism and fisheries. So every now and then it faces a liquidity crunch. It has a lot of foreign debt. So as Maldives ran into the crisis again, Mohammad Muizu changed his approach and he has visited India. He even attended PM Modi's swearing in ceremony in 2024. And India has provided a lot of additional financial assistance and investments in new projects. So today we have seen a repair of this relationship, some normalcy coming back, and a complete reset. What appeared to be a hostile relationship very quickly was turned around with tactful and silent diplomacy from India. That's why, more than outrage, it is tactful diplomacy which will work. And that's a key lesson that you take away from here. But of course, the continuing Chinese presence and influence continues to pose a threat. And the continued anti India elements who are politically active on the ground, they will continue to pose a big challenge for Indian diplomacy. So, this is the complete overview that I wanted to give you with regard to our neighborhood in South Asia. Yesterday, we had a general discussion on the South Asia region, focusing on the political, social, and economic aspects. Today, we have understood India's ties with the neighbors in depth, right? Taking a deep dive into this relationship, country by country. In the next class, coming up next week, Monday and Tuesday, we will have a deeper look at India China, mainly the border issues, the conflict, and the 62 war, and as well as the conflicts with Pakistan. So we have two more sessions just for the neighborhood, and then we will explore the other chapters provided in the NCERT textbooks. So I really hope this session was useful, interesting, and insightful. If you benefited, do let me know in the comments. Do press the like button. And as I bring the session to an end, I again wish you a very happy Independence Day. So do let me know what you think in the comments, and we'll see you next week, next Monday. Till then, take care. Have a good night.